When people talk about how World War II ended in the Pacific, the conversation almost always comes down to three options: the invasion of Japan, the demonstration of the atomic bomb, or the actual use of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But hidden in the archives, rarely taught, rarely discussed, is a fourth option President Harry Truman seriously considered. It wasn't nuclear, it wasn't a ground invasion, and it wasn't the firebombing campaign that had already reduced Japanese cities to ash. It was something far more silent, far more patient, and in some ways far more devastating: a full-scale expansion of Operation Starvation, combined with a massive chemical blockade designed to break Japan's ability to import, grow, or transport food. Truman's secret fourth option was a plan to end the war by systematically suffocating Japan's food supplies without ever stepping foot on the home islands. Operation Starvation had already begun months before the atomic bombs. The United States Army Air Forces, using B-29 superfortresses, dropped thousands of advanced magnetic mines into Japan's coastal waters. These mines were designed to detonate underneath ships, without direct contact, tearing hulls open and sinking vessels instantly. The operation was astonishingly effective, sinking or crippling hundreds of ships and cutting Japan's maritime transport capacity by over 80%. By July 1945, Japan was nearly incapable of moving food, fuel, or raw materials between its own islands. The Japanese military called the mines the silent monsters. American officers called the results a strangulation in slow motion. What Truman's advisors proposed was not simply continuing Operation Starvation, it was scaling it up to a level that would completely isolate Japan and force surrender through famine, economic paralysis, and collapse of internal distribution. The plan called for doubling the mining campaign, targeting not only coastal waters but every major harbor, river mouth, and shipping lane. Japan depended heavily on coastal shipping even within its own borders. Railways alone could not sustain the population. The United States believed that if these maritime routes were shut down entirely, Japan would face mass starvation within months. But this wasn't the controversial part. What made this plan the forbidden option was the proposed addition of mass chemical disruption, not through poison gas as many mistakenly assume, but through wide-scale use of non-lethal agricultural chemicals designed to wipe out rice harvests, contaminate storage facilities, and destroy the country's remaining food reserves. The United States had developed plant-killing chemical agents capable of rendering farmland unusable for an entire growing season. They were early precursors to herbicidal warfare, decades before the defoliants used in Vietnam. These chemicals weren't intended to kill people directly, but the starvation they caused would have been deadly on a massive scale. The plan, drafted by intelligence analysts and approved by several military planners, argued that Japan could be forced into surrender without a single nuclear detonation or ground invasion if its food supply were wiped out. The logic was brutally simple: a population that cannot eat, cannot fight. The blockade would be sealed with submarines, mines, and aircraft. Rice paddies, Japan's lifeblood, would be targeted using low-flying bombers dropping chemical agents at the start of the growing season. The result would be catastrophic food shortages affecting civilians and soldiers alike. And here is the chilling part. Projected casualty estimates from starvation were far higher than those expected from the atomic bombings. Internal documents predicted that by early 1946, millions of Japanese civilians, especially children and the elderly, would face lethal malnutrition. Planners acknowledged this directly, describing the outcome as economic and nutritional collapse. Yet some believed it was more humane than a full invasion, which was estimated to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and potentially millions of Japanese lives if the fighting reached cities like Tokyo and Osaka. For Truman, the question became disturbingly philosophical. Was it morally preferable to kill quickly with atomic fire, or slowly through starvation and agricultural destruction? It sounds unthinkable today, but in mid-1945, after years of brutal war, options that would never be considered acceptable in peacetime were on the table. Admiral Chester Nimitz supported the expanded mining campaign wholeheartedly, calling it well, the least costly path to victory. General Curtis LeMay argued that chemical herbicidal warfare was unnecessary because, in his view, the mines alone would starve Japan soon enough. Others warned, though, that a blockade plus starvation strategy could actually prolong the war by months or even a year, giving the Soviet Union more time to seize territory in Asia and potentially reshape the entire geopolitical landscape of the Pacific. And this is where politics entered the equation. If the United States chose a slow economic strangulation method, Japan might surrender to the Soviets instead. Or, the USSR might occupy more of northern Japan before the regime collapsed. Truman and his cabinet were deeply concerned about Soviet expansion, especially after witnessing Stalin's moves in Eastern Europe. Ending the war quickly, not simply winning it, became a strategic priority. There was another problem with the starvation plan: the moral optics. The United States had already been criticized for civilian casualties caused by firebombing Tokyo. A deliberate strategy of destroying rice harvests could appear as a war on civilians rather than on the Japanese military. And while the atomic bomb would undoubtedly cause civilian deaths, Truman believed it could be framed as a blow against military infrastructure, and that it would end the war decisively. By late July 1945, Truman faced four choices: invade, demonstrate the bomb, use the bomb, or initiate the starvation chemical blockade. The invasion risked massive casualties. A bomb demonstration might fail or be ignored. The starvation plan was slow, politically risky, and likely to cause more deaths over time. That left the nuclear option. In the end, Truman rejected the starvation chemical strategy not because it was ineffective, it would have worked, but because it was too slow, too morally ambiguous, and too geopolitically risky. The atomic bomb, horrific as it was, offered something the other options didn't: finality. The public rarely hears that the United States nearly chose a strategy that would have killed millions through hunger rather than two bombs through fire. History remembers Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but Truman's secret fourth option remains buried in documents and war planning memos, an alternative path that almost reshaped the entire end of World War II. And perhaps the most haunting lesson is this: the world often fixates on what happened, while the far darker paths we almost took remain hidden in the shadows, reminding us how thin the line truly is between wartime strategy and catastrophe.